Welcome to Lit Poetry, the podcast where we go on a journey of discovery, reading, analyzing, and discussing great poetry from around the world. Poetry is worth it because the reading and writing of poetry is a revolutionary act that has the potential to transform both the reader and our world.
Welcome to the Lit Poetry Podcast Season 1. My name is James Laidler, Australian poet, writer and your host. In today's episode, we'll be bending the prison bars of our hearts, liberating our inner voices and breaking into gentle bird song with the poem Bluebird by Charles Bukowski. This is a powerful poem that points to the loneliness and hidden beauty lying at the heart of our shared human experience, a universal reality that many people tend to bury and hide from view. Joining us to discuss this poem on the Lit Poetry Podcast, I'm very excited to announce that we have live from the USA, Philip Freeman, who is a very highly talented voiceover artist, a musician. I'm very, very pleased to be talking to Phil today because it is actually the first time I've had the chance to talk to him in person since I met him and his wife online and we started a working relationship. But maybe I should explain. I first made contact with Lucy, Phil's wife, about a year ago, and we embarked on this sort of crazy idea I had called Lit Poetry. You see, I had a dream of trying to promote the reading and love of poetry in society by developing a digital platform that created poetry that was an intoxicating fusion of music, beautiful voices and words, poetry that would appeal to a modern audience, poetry that would be accessible. I wanted to promote poetry in such a way that it became easier to understand. It goes without saying that the main problem I had was with finance. And you see, I have a very limited budget and yet a very stubborn desire to produce high quality work. And that's where Lucy and Phil came in. I found Lucy's freelance voiceover advertisement on the website Fiverr and got in contact. I was in need of a female voiceover artist to read some poems I wanted to produce. Lucy responded to my first email, took on board my limited budget and went to work. Over the last year, she has read poetry for me from Adrienne Rich, Sylvia Plath, Emily Dickinson and Margaret Atwood, just to name a few. And everything Lucy has read for me has been exceptional in its quality. Then, a little bit more recently, I was in need of a male American voice, so I thought I'd give Lucy's husband Phil a try. And oh my God, his voice is also sublime. Anyway, what has unfolded has been a lovely little relationship shared via email from the opposite sides of the world. But before I introduce you to Phil, let's take a listen to this week's poem that will be really at the heart of our discussion. Without further ado, I give you Bluebird by Charles Bukowski, read by one half of this quite amazing voiceover duo, Philip Freeman.
Bluebird by Charles Bukowski. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on him and inhale cigarette smoke, and the whores and the bartenders and the grocery clerks never know that he's in there. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay down. Do you want to mess me up? You want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night, sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, I know that you're there, so don't be sad. And I put him back, but he's singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die. And we sleep together like that, with our secret pact And it's nice enough to make a man weep. But I don't weep. Do you?
So welcome back to the Lit Poetry Podcast, and welcome to Phil. How are you going?
Hi. Thank you so much for having me, James. I sincerely appreciate it. I can speak on behalf of my wife as well that we've really, really enjoyed working with you over the past year. It's been a wonderful experience for the both of us.
Oh, and likewise, it's been quite amazing getting to randomly meet people and put your trust in them, and it's just been pure gold the whole way. It's been quite remarkable, actually. Yeah.
It's amazing what the internet can do. That's the one thing outside of the social media and the double-edged sword that is technology. This is the best of it, I would say. You know, when things like this happen.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, you've been over backwards and been very accommodating for my needs and understanding where I'm coming from and the passion of this very humble project. And I feel like you've really sort of keyed into that passion, and when you've been reading poetry for me, I can really hear that passion come through.
Well, thank you. Lucy and I, when we first got when we got your first work, when you brought that to us and gave us the pitch on what you were doing, that really spoke to us, not just on a professional level, but also on our artistic level. We're both, we're both working musicians. We both thoroughly enjoy writing music as well and reading good literature and reading good poetry. So the fact that you were bringing that to us was just such a joy to be able to interpret good literature and to contribute to a new spin on it, to a beautifully done rendition of it, both musically, on video. But it was just a wonderful opportunity for us to experience some great art. So we really appreciate you doing that for us and providing that opportunity. So yeah,
no, it's been great and quite fortuitous. It's quite remarkable that out of the host of people I could have chosen to send emails to, and quite literally, you guys, you were the first people I sent a message to, and I just hit the jackpot with people, and I could tell from the start that you were into literature, you were open to poetry, and I also kind of got the gist that maybe if you're doing voiceover work, there would be a lot of commercial stuff, and in some ways it pays the bill, but it's not something you can probably necessarily get super excited about.
This is something we got super excited about. Absolutely.
That's great. Yeah. So, Phil, could you tell us a bit about your inspirations, your backstory, like what you do, and also particularly, like you mentioned, the poetry. What is exactly your exposure to literature and poetry and that sort of thing?
Sure. And I guess we'll start with when Lucy and I met. We met in college in concert choir. She was a junior and I was a freshman, and it was just, we became friends almost immediately. It was really, really amazing chemistry between us, even though we were just meeting for the first time, and we were just fostering a new friendship. And then as the years went on, after I graduated, we ended up dating for about a year or two, and unfortunately we parted ways because of professional circumstances. She was working up in New York City at the time. I was doing stuff with my band, and given that, it really just it was tough, but after my mother passed away, we rekindled our friendship, and things started to change for her professionally, to the point where we were really starting to work together again. We started playing shows together again under the moniker Lucille and the Wolf, and that just rekindled our love for each other. And then we got back together. 2 years later, we got married, and it's just it's been absolutely wonderful. And because of the pandemic, we lost a lot of work as live entertainers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it was, and plus I also have another band called Small Town Titans that I've been. It's a rock band that I've been a part of for the last decade. So we canceled a bunch of shows. And her and I had also done the same thing. We canceled a bunch of Lucille and the Wolf shows, and we wanted to. And of course, it was a scary time for everyone, and we decided to just see what we could do at home. We both love, we both love anything to do with art, really. Music and art, that's something that we both just love and enjoy. So we were looking for any avenue that we could express ourselves in some way, shape, or form, either just, personally or professionally, in some regard to music and art. So we ended up finding Fiverr. We ended up just giving it a shot and seeing what would happen as far as voiceover is concerned. I even put my feelers out to see if people were interested in commissioning composition work for what I do. Like, I also write music for it, and it's been a wonderful experience. Fiverr has been a really, really good platform for that, and that's how we met you. And
yeah. Well, I would say that I probably got on the platform about the same time, because we were in lockdown here in Australia, and I'm a teacher. I teach poetry, and I write as well in my spare time, and I was going stir crazy, and I just needed something else that was meaty. I needed something that got me out there, and I stumbled across Fiverr because I was playing with my own voice, and when you're wanting to represent a whole sort of gamut of poetry, you can't limit yourself to your own voice. It's about the poetry. It's not about. It's not an ego trip. It's really and finding you guys just fantastic. But it sounds really interesting with Lucy. That sounds like a really healthy basis for a relationship, that you've had this great friendship, and the friendship's also about having common things common things that you both have an interest.
Yes. It's something I'm very, very thankful for. It definitely opposes the trope that you should never work with your spouse. No. She and I work with each other every single day to support each other in the things that we do together, and also separately as far as our profession is concerned. She has so many irons in the fire when it comes to working with special events bands, with her company. There's a company that she works for and has done so for the last year and a half, and she's done a wonderful job with them. My work with Titans, we help each other out. We do, we schedule out our entire year as far as like shows are concerned. She's very organized. She keeps me crossing my T's and dotting my I's, if you will. So it's an amazing symbiotic relationship, and I couldn't do it with anyone else. So.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing, and maybe if one day travel opens up and you ever come touring in Australia, you have to look me up, and I'll put you up and look after you.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah. So look. A really interesting thing that I wanted to talk to you about was actually the process involved in, so that the audience knows, so how I've been going about sort of producing these sort of music video-esque poems and sending work to people like yourself. And so could you discuss with me the process when you receive a poem from me, and so what's going through your mind, and what are the considerations, what's the process, and some of those sort of things?
Absolutely. And I think, at least if Lucy or I get a job from you, a poem, it's something that I also, consistently bring up with my vocal students as well when I teach voice, is that you want to look at the context, the diction and the syntax of each song or each poem or each piece of literature. Can you can you grab the essence of what's happening within the poem? Can you extract the story? And from that story, can you extract the emotion? And can you relate an emotion or an experience that you have had from the poetry? And in every case, at least within our working relationship, that's something that, you know, Lucy and I discussed regularly when we were working on this together. And, you know, and it didn't take much discussion as far as knowing what the emotion was right off the get-go. Great poetry, it jumps right out at you.
Yeah,
you don't even have to discuss it. It's right there. You know exactly how to feel when you're performing that piece. You know exactly what's going on, you know, or at least your own subjective interpretation of it based on your experience. And through that, it's such a wonderful experience to discover that, because and just to discover great poetry, and also exercise your performance skills with that, because you can find different dimensions of yourself and different emotions that you have. You can find out what moves you, and that's what's so wonderful about poetry and music and good literature.
Yeah, and I certainly put the challenge out there for you to begin with, because you actually came on quite late in the piece. I've been working with Lucy quite a bit, and then I needed this American male voice, and I had the poem I had was from a gay man who had written a poem about a couple that had been burnt to death by immolation in Texas.
Heartbreak.
Oh, heartbreaking. Really, just it's a brutal poem. But you read that with such intensity and poignancy. It was quite, you just really nailed it. But, you know, I remember writing to you saying, well, I think the first two poems, and then what was the other one? Funeral Blues. So both written by gay men. And I had to assure Lucy that you weren't becoming gay or anything. Yeah, but like you really, so your ability to empathise, I think, with stories that you obviously found something really common in them, and yet the stories also, so that those stories are universal, clearly. So you've yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
The challenges.
Absolutely. When you commission me for those pieces and reading those pieces, I think. Anyone with a conscience, anyone with a heart can relate to those pieces, no matter who it's about or what it's about. Everyone deserves the chance to love whoever they want to love, in my opinion. I know that some people don't share that, and I pray for those people every day that they see the light of that there's no limitation to love, you know, at least, and no one should have to go. It should have to live in fear of being burned to death because of that. I thought to myself, you know, what if I think about my my unconditional love for my wife, and what if I was in a situation where somehow my love for my wife was considered an abomination, or was considered something that would threaten my life? I wouldn't stop doing it. I can't stop loving my wife, you know, and I have every right to love who I want to love, and everyone else does too. And when reading those poems, I thought about the pain associated with that. I literally put myself in that situation, in that burning building with my wife. And can only imagine the pain that those two those two beautiful human beings went through. And love is love. It's as simple as that. And anyone who reads that poem and interprets that poem, I just hope that someone maybe that had a differing opinion about the LGBTQ community reads that poem and understands. It has a little bit more understanding of what, you know, that community goes through, based on, you know, everyday experience of just that tiny voice in the back of their head saying, "Watch your back."
Yeah.
You know,
And look, I think that's the advantage of poetry and art for that matter, because in its essence, art is political. It's
Certainly
about
can be.
universal issues that really need to be
Right.
on our radar. And I think you're perfectly
Absolutely.
right. But it's interesting that you've brought that lens of your own experience with your love of your wife to.
Right.
Yeah, and you've realised and made those connections, and it's so authentic, your voice. That this is just a universal thing. Love between different people of different sexuality and all that sort of stuff is still love, and I think that's where poetry can do its work, because it takes people into that story and into that experience, and I think it encourages people to empathise with those marginal voices. And Lucy's done a whole lot of work on feminist poetry for me, which again I think is coming from that marginal voice, and she's absolutely nailed it. And I assume that she might have been thinking about her own experience as a woman in those poems.
Absolutely.
And that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's at least for her and I, we definitely emphasize the value of teamwork. There's no it's equal parts between the two of us. We definitely do a lot of things like the whole trope of her being in the kitchen or me mowing the lawn. We go back and forth, and she does, like, as far as like the household chores and stuff like that. So I know that seems a little bit
No, it's the same in
superfluous.
It's exactly the same in my household here too.
Yeah,
So
there you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a team effort, and it's
Yeah, no, I'm
I
married
think
to
it's more fun that way.
I'm married to a very strong woman, and
There you go.
and it's very much an equal relationship. It's fantastic.
There you go.
So we might just stop here for a short break, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Lit Poetry Podcast. So, look, Bill, just another question I have for you. So, when I've commissioned you to do poems, and then you've done them for me, and then I've turned them into their end product, what has been your impression? Like, have you been surprised, or like, are there any poems that sort of gone, oh, gee, I didn't think about that, or?
Well, watching the collaboration that I've seen your work grow over the years. Or over the past year. When you did, I believe, it was a terrifying poem that you commissioned Lucy for about the lake, the pond.
Early on, this is a photograph of me, and I stripped that one right back,
and that it was a very simple video, but boy, you get the creeps looking at that picture, because you can't, you're not necessarily, you can't see the body,
No.
it's so.
No. Yeah, it really speaks to the Eurasia of the female voice.
Yes,
and I know I've taught
absolutely.
that poem a lot, and students really find it very compelling. The girls in class
Incredibly
just
compelling.
really lock onto it. Yeah, so I think you're right. The trajectory of my work, it was pretty rough early on, and accumulating skills. But I sort of actually was I spent a year in East Timor working there, and I actually managed to work my way onto. They were producing their first ever feature film on a national level, where Australian filmmakers and sound engineers and all were buddying up with Timorese. And I came on as the second DP. I didn't know what it was a big role, but it's really basically you're just sort of just bossing people around and making sure that the schedule all takes place. But it really was probably one of the most wonderful experiences of my life, and certainly changed my perception of what artistic endeavour could be, because I've never shared in such a corporate enterprise before, like working with others.
Right.
Because I've always been a lone hand. I've written a couple of novels and that sort of thing, and it's me sort of hiding away in my room doing my thing. And so that exposure to filmmaking sort of inspired me, and it made me feel like you can have a go at anything really, if you put your mind to it. Yeah, which I imagine is probably what you've what you've kind of, with Fiverr, and so that was kind of like a uncharted territory in some ways.
It was a wild experience as far as growth is concerned, and I've certainly seen that growth in your work with the music and the editing and like bringing together all of these elements. That was just, it was really awesome to see, especially with some of the more recent poems that you've commissioned for Lucy and I. It's been really cool to see that, see what you're doing growing, and we've also seen growth in our department as well, and it's really cool to see something that you cultivate, or to spring forth and start to blossom. It's that's been happening with my music composition side of things as well, and it's really cool to see something that I have been absolutely obsessed with most of my life, and as far as like virtual orchestration and the industry standard technology, being obsessed with that since 2017 and seeing that become a professional avenue, it's kind of a little bit of a miracle almost,
that's great.
So as I'm sure you can relate with working as a director of photography, watching this wonderful project of yours continue to grow, it's a wonderful experience to watch.
It is. So we might just throw to another break, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the Lit Poetry Podcast, where I'm speaking to Phil Freeman about his work at Lit Poetry, which probably brings us to Bluebird. So this particular podcast is featuring Bluebird. So I release a poem every week, and this was actually produced probably a couple of months ago. I think you probably produced this for me. That might have been the first time that you heard it. So what do you know about Charles Bukowski? Like, what do you take from the poem that you just heard?
The first time I ever heard Charles Bukowski's name was in a Modest Mouse song in high school, and the line is God who'd want to, something about it. The name of the song is Bukowski, and one of the lines is God who would want to be such an asshole.
Yep. Yes.
So that got me interested, slightly interested. Okay, I want to find out who this Bukowski guy is, and I know that Red Hot Chili Peppers had mentioned his name in a song here and there, and so I wanted to look up some of his literature, and what an interesting character. Most people who write literature have a lot of, they're very left or right of center in the sense that they are a very unique, and they're not afraid to show that uniqueness. And Charles Bukowski certainly isn't. He certainly isn't an exception to that. He worked at the post office. Knowing that he worked at the post office for most of his life, and only, one of his poems talks about how he would just eat a payday, and that would be all he ate all day. Very utilitarian in his life. And there's something, I don't know what it is about utilitarianism and minimalism and this kind of stark American stoicism that certain literary figures have, like John Steinbeck, for example. I feel that sense. Even Hunter S. Thompson at times. There's this minimalism and ruggedness and utilitarianism to their own individual life. However, they go out and experience a multitude of colorful experiences.
That's right.
It's so even they don't have a lot of things, but they experience a lot of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And look, Bukowski's rough around the edges, and he certainly can. Some people would see him as very crass, but there's this intense honesty in some of his work. He sort of seems to just to cut right to the center of some issues and just to lay it out.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It cuts. It is not easy to read sometimes.
No,
because of how hard it cuts. And I would definitely say that Bluebird is one of those. Is one of those poems.
Yes, it's an exceptional poem that really.
Absolutely. because I think there's quite the tragedy. It's, you know, you can even relate it, and this is such a ridiculous parallel, but if you're familiar with the film Step Brothers, where it's right at the end and the father says, "I have my dinosaur back." Just kids.
I haven't seen the film. No.
Don't. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to give it away.
No, that's all right.
But at some point,
Yeah.
at some point in the film, it's a ridiculous film and it's hilarious. I love it so much. The dad says, "Don't lose your dinosaur," which is essentially the same thing as saying, "Don't lose your bluebird." And you know, and it was just I felt my heartstrings pull quite a bit reading this, because I think a lot of people can relate to that dream, that aspiration, that part of themselves that they want to foster, however, whether it's social constructs or the way that they were raised or the pressures that they felt on the outside, or at least they perceived on the outside, that they just stuffed it in there and kept it hidden from other people.
Yeah, I think the reality of people
themselves.
often gets choked out, and I think in our modern world with social media and all the accoutrements that go with that, you know, that's a huge problem that people face, where they're, you know, curating versions of themselves and constantly wearing a mask, and I think the poem speaks about what actually lies beneath that mask for everybody, in a way, and it's kind of like an ode to the universal, you know, love and loneliness that is at the heart, at the beating heart of reality. That if we were able to scratch the surface, we would be able to dig down and see it in people. And for such a like an often crass man who was bombastic and very didactic in his opinion, for him to express this is doubly profound, I think.
Well, it's even evident in some of his some of the videos of him that he obviously feels things very deeply. There are videos of him weeping openly over poetry that he wrote because it just triggered a memory, or the parting ways with a lover, and just you know, you can tell that this man has built a hard exterior because of the pain that he has gone through, because of either self-inflicted or otherwise. And I think a lot of you know, I think everyone does this to some degree, but I do think that men are more predisposed to try to create as much of a shield and feel as little emotion except for anger as possible. You know, like that seems to be like, you know, being angry is okay, but don't you ever let anybody see those tears. Don't ever let
that's right.
You know, love somebody openly, or be joyous, or to have emotion. And thank God I was raised by two incredible human beings that told me that it was okay to express a multitude of feelings. You know, like there's such a beautiful and amazing palette to the human emotional experience, and it's important to be in touch with all of those emotions. You know, and I've never. I think to a degree there is always a bit of shame, feeling a bit of sadness publicly, you know, or you know, or feeling vulnerable in front of people. And I think certainly there are certain feelings that should be protected and maybe are not appropriate to share openly, you know, with everyone and their mother, because you know everyone's going to have an opinion on that, like, you know. But I do feel that there is more room for expression, because if you bottle that up, if you bottle that up over time, it's going to burst at some point, and it's going to express itself in a very painful way or a negative way. You know, if like if I feel as if, you know, if you have an issue with something, or if you have, you know, if you're frustrated with someone, that there is a way to express that shows your frustration, but is also compassionate. You know, I think that that's very important, that there's a balance of emotions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we live in a world of stereotypes where you're quite right in pointing out that strength is, is seen as like this quality that you're meant to have a brave face and not show your emotion. But I think the paradox is that, you know, if we really think about it deeply, that it's actually far more an act of bravery to show your vulnerability. And we actually need that point of reference. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I had a thought, and I want to share it.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Apologize. You know, my mother, she, whenever I felt like, you know, ashamed about, you know, feeling a certain way or feeling sad or about something, my mother always looked at me with just this unconditional love and intensity, and she said, "My sweet son, the shortest line in the Bible is Jesus wept." Okay, so you talk about it, whether you know, and whatever you believe, despite your belief system, whatever it might be. Christ is the archetype of the perfect man. Christ is the archetype of the best human being you can possibly be. That is it. That is the way that it is supposed to be interpreted. Jesus wept. So even at the highest echelon of the human experience, the best human being you can possibly be, you still express emotion and an unconditional love for your fellow human beings.
I think so. And that goes very much against the mantra of, you know, sort of modern stoicism and other philosophies like that. I think
there are great nuggets to be taken from stoicism. I think there are times where you do have to put on a brave face, but you have to balance that. You have to balance that. You have to. Otherwise, there will be an imbalance and way more pain.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
Over time, than necessary. If you don't allow some type of, especially if it feels innate, if it feels in your nature to express emotion, to allow it to happen, you know, and to do so in obviously, and like I said, in a balanced fashion. There are times where it can be the exact opposite, and too much emotion, like putting out all of your dirty laundry on social media. It's just like people that just like talk about all of like what you should be like, you know, talking to your therapist or your or your close friends about. You're just putting it out there like publicly. No, that's right.
And I think that comes back on a personal level to motivations. You know, why if you're being vulnerable, what is your motivation for being so? And there are lots of poor motivations out there that we need to guard ourselves against, I suppose.
Yes. And I think it... Yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say the other thing about Bluebird, before I forget, I think is really interesting, is that, again, I think it's interesting in terms of social analysis, that we tend to put our heroes on pedestals and that sort of thing. But we've got here a man, Bukowski, who's, you know, living a pretty hard life. He was an alcoholic and a whole lot of other things. And I think this is really strong evidence that you need to be open for profound insights, for beautiful things to come from surprising places, from the margins. And I know personally, like reading his poetry, also, and you know, I know people who have got mental health issues and that sort of thing. And sometimes, you know, they often get just disregarded. But sometimes they just say the most profound things that other people often can't articulate because they're expressing things out of a deep experience. That, you know, you can have your degrees in philosophy and, you know, be a brilliant thinker, but sometimes a person from that perspective can just kind of level kings with their thinking. Like it's and I think Bukowski, that's what he achieves at times.
Absolutely. There's you know, to further that point and to kind of come back to what I was saying before, you know, there's a gift in creating poetry and music and art, because what an amazing platform to be able to be vulnerable, but to also provide value to a potential intrinsic value to those that read or experience that poetry, experience that piece of art or music. Because you are like Charles Bukowski is so vulnerable in this piece, yet he's not just throwing it out there on Facebook and saying, I had a bad day, I don't feel like I'm expressing myself. Like, he literally put that into a piece of art that then opens up and makes an impression upon the individual that reads it, and therefore creates intrinsic value for those who read it. So and what an incredible intention, you know, to it's therapy through art. And I think that's a wonderful expression.
And there's the line in the poem where he talks about, do you want to blow my sails in Europe? And I think it's pretty funny, isn't it? But he's kind of being he's being quite self-deprecating in a way, and being honest and showing that he is a flawed, egotistical person like anyone. And that, again, makes great art when people are prepared to go, look, you know, this is me, I'm flawed. And look, there's something actually real in me. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, and that's the thing. You know, every single one of us on this planet is a human being. It takes all kinds. You know, it takes all kinds. It's incredible how we will put people on pedestals, and sometimes deservingly so, because of the great achievements and successes that they have brought to the world, the value that they've brought to the world. You know, Albert Einstein, it comes to mind, simply because what an incredible mind. However, he was considered he really struggled to be a good father to his children, because he was so obsessed with his work. You know, so it's a constant. There's a constant ebb and flow. There's a constant yin and yang.
Yeah, it's a hard balance.
Individuals, you know, it's a hard balance. Especially when you read about certain individuals who have achieved great things, but also the not so great things that they've done. You know, it makes it's difficult to separate the art from the artist sometimes. However, in this sense, I feel that Bukowski is forcing the reader to mash those two together, that the art and the artist is one and the same, and that this is a testimony, really. And
that's right.
Cry, at least in my interpretation, a cry out to those who feel the same way. I can imagine. I mean,
and this is a man that wouldn't have passed the politically correct test, you know. And I think that's interesting now too, because, and rightfully so, we know there's more pressure on people now today to toe the line and to make sure they're living good moral lives. And but when it becomes sort of an oppressive mechanism that's sort of, I don't know, manufacturing behaviour, and then we dismiss some people, because I think, you know, Bukowski, I think probably some of the ways he would have treated women would be absolutely deplorable, and he should be, you know, derided for that. But this broken man still had moments in his humanity of beauty, and that's the thing I think is really important when we're thinking about political correctness. That's the reality we can't lose. Which is it's a difficult conversation to have, because
it is a difficult conversation to have, because it's George Orwell's 1984 comes to mind. I know a lot of people say, like, roll their eyes and think that's like, you know, that 1984 is the manifesto of conspiracy theorists and right-wing nuts, at least in these days. And here's, at least in the United States. And here's the thing: when you take away freedom of speech, it's or take away the idea of non-censorship, when you start eliminating history rather than putting it in a museum and explaining the context of it, and learning from that history, we're bound to repeat it. The horrors of that book, I see a very troubling trend towards that. And here's the thing, the intention of some of this movement, the first page is a good intention, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You are trying, because you're trying to get rid of a portion of that speech, which understandably so, where does that line end? Where does that line stop? When is it going to be acceptable? What's the difference between hate, for example, hate speech and speech that you simply dislike or disagree with?
Yeah.
And you are missing out on so much growth and understanding. I refuse to, that's the thing. I cannot shut out somebody completely or say that I will never have a conversation with them because they disagree with me, or that I disagree with them, even vehemently. If anything, I want to have that conversation with them, because it comes back to that point. For example, I watched a debate between two philosophers, and one of them, Slavoj Žižek, he's a very
hard to listen to, but
very hard to listen to.
Yeah.
But he's a fascinating.
He's a fascinating guy. Yeah,
I can't help but admire him, even though I vehemently disagree with his line of thinking.
Yeah.
But it comes back to the idea, that even someone that you may disagree with, or someone that has pain, or has done self-inflicted pain, or has inflicted pain on others, either unconsciously or consciously in certain ways, that they can say something immensely profound, that there is a divine spark still within them. And that was a perfect example. Slavoj Žižek brought up the idea of the divinity of man, and that the inherent divinity of man is the separation from divinity itself. And he was quoting a book, but he was the one who brought that up. There's obviously a piece of him.
Yeah, and again, so insights come from all sorts of unexpected places.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think, and it's all about conversation, and that's the problem today, is we live in this sort of, again, this polarized world of camps, and we have to find that fertile ground. But I think there's been a shift more recently into conversational modes, a little bit, and you can see that growth around the place, which is encouraging, I think.
I think that there are certain elements out there that would discourage us looking at those places. I think a beautiful place where that's being fostered is the internet. I don't think it's happening in mass media. Unfortunately, I would like to see that.
No.
But long form conversation podcasts.
Yes.
There's so much fostering for conversation now.
Yeah, I think there's been a move away from debate formats a little bit and into conversation, which is great. But at the same time, you've still got forums and comment areas that people are just shooting off all sorts of comments and not really, and there's not much thought. There's just basically you're going to sort of reinforce your opinion, and you're going to let people have it, which is very frustrating. But people have to also, but the cost is that people actually have to be open to being wrong, and that is the real challenge. You, me, everybody, because secretly we're all a little bit proud of our views, and we hold on to it and think, well, no, I reckon I'm pretty sound here, but to actually be open to really being wrong about something and having to look at it again, that's not an easy place to get to.
You have to allow for that to be the case, especially when it comes to, and here's, I think it's very important to have solid values and principles within one's own life intrinsically. But when it comes to views outside of your own intrinsic place, for example, what you sow, so shall you reap. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Very, very simple. Like those are two values that I are solid ground for me. Like those, like you cannot change that for me. Like
yeah,
I think there's
but I
nothing
could
that
see,
will-
but I could challenge you on that though, because I agree. I really agree with that, and that's actually through all cultures you seem to see that sort of karma-esque
absolutely Oh
law.
my gosh,
But I
yeah.
remember teaching this profound novel to kids in the school I'm at, and it came up with the idea that where there was this good man, and he said if you that law can be applied really badly because people can start using it as a formula that if I do good will be done to me, and that becomes a motivation. And as soon as you have a motivation of I'm going to be nice to that person because good things are going to come, that is actually, and the idea in this text was you need to be good for goodness' sake. There should be no idea that you're waiting for a sort of karmic payback that's going to wrap your life in, great times.
No.
And that's
Yeah.
and so that's the mistake in that rule that people make, I think.
That is a huge mistake, and that's a very, very profound insight into that, because that brings a very, very egotistical
Oh,
side
it
to
does,
that.
yeah. And
Something
when
that
you,
you must be very, very careful of.
and when you're
Exactly,
working
because-
with teenagers, I know I'm doing this text, and then their eyes looking at me going, "What? So I can't just do good, and I'm doing good because people are going to like." Well, you need to ask yourself: are you doing good for goodness' sake because it's the moral thing to do, out of a place of values and just kindness?
Right.
Would you be able to do it if nobody was looking? Now that's hard. That's really hard, but that's the aim, isn't it? That's the goal.
Precisely, and I think there's a lot of archetypes in great literature, in the great religious texts of all cultures that act as a blueprint to that, to acting in doing good for good's sake. Like, and here's a perfect. I think here's a rebuttal to that in that sense. Here's if the good like do unto others as you have them do unto you, and what you sow, so shall you reap. If you take those two, intrinsic laws and you apply them, and let's say you go to hell for that, are you still going to do it? So here's the thing: if I am destined for eternal damnation because I loved my wife unconditionally and would try to be the best husband that I possibly could, that I, did my best to contribute as much as I possibly could, either through charity or my time or my energy, and to be fair in my dealings and to be honest, to make sure that there was an equal exchange between the people that I worked with, the people that that I help. If I'm going to hell for that, yeah, I'm gonna go because it's worth it, because I feel that goodness here in this present moment. And that's the thing, if I need to go suffer for eternity because other people and other things are going to be better off, I'm going there. Because I don't like, it has very little to do with me. It has a lot to do with what's surrounding me, and I think that's very important, and it's such an incredible point with what you said.
Yeah,
that has to be factored in. That no matter what it happens, those it's not based on a motivation that that you're somehow racking up points. You have to eliminate that idea completely in order those laws to apply correctly, or at least transmute it completely. Self comes out is out of that equation. So that's and I think for you to say that to certain individuals, that would rock their foundation.
Yeah, no, because I think the common understanding of why you do good and how you do rack up points, that's part of the motivation, and everyone's playing that game all over the place. And look, and that's why I like poetry, that's why I like art, and that's why I love teaching kids, because it's the ability to go into that space and challenge those ideas.
Exactly.
Plant those little seeds in people so they germinate into something.
Yes, and in some ways, I think for certain individuals, it may rock the foundation, but it will also forge. It'll be like forging steel. It'll make that foundation stronger. It will create more. It'll create more either strength or flexibility in that foundation, depending.
Well, and I think there's as much excitement, rather than doing good things and getting the rewards. There is actually as much reward in falling in love with a beautiful idea. Like if you fall into the idea of love, like that's a noble thing, and no one has to see me do it, but that can be a very exciting thing in itself.
Absolutely.
I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very interesting.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fantastic talk.
Yeah. Certainly has.
So, Phil, I just want a couple of last things. I've got a couple of questions down here for you. So, it would be really interesting because I've been sending you all sorts of poetry. Actually, I have one lined up for Lucy to send us shortly.
Awesome.
But is there a poet or a poem in particular you would love to do at some stage that I'm unaware of? Because I'm sure that I've probably exposed you to things that you haven't come across before.
Right. And I love that. I love being introduced to new poetry. I think it's a wonderful thing. T.S. Eliot would be a lot of fun to do something by T.S. Eliot. It would be. I've always enjoyed literature from him. Shakespeare. I mean, the classics.
Yep.
The classic, and especially now that I'm older, looking back on the work of Shakespeare, how genius that
amazing.
work is, and incredible that is. It's just. So a monologue from King Lear or Hamlet or any of those would be phenomenal. And I like whether done on a microphone or whether done in front of a stage, I think would be a beautiful thing.
Well, I can definitely accommodate you with that.
All right.
Yeah. So and it's good actually because I have been getting traditionally my London-based guy to do some of those things, but I think you have a voice that's well suited to the Shakespeare mode as well. I actually heard recently a discussion on radio with Hamlet. It's quite interesting, and it was somebody who's going on. I really believe in this. There's a whole idea of to your own self be true from Polonius, and I'm thinking, oh my God, the guy hasn't read the play. Like Polonius is just like this horrible human being, and the vanity of what he's saying is actually, like. Shakespeare's just going, oh, this guy, like, you don't want to be that sort of person who's motivated to do things for its own sake. Exactly what we're talking about. But see, and it's popular culture grabs hold of that and says, that's a great saying, that represents my philosophy, but it's such a terrible philosophy to have, to my own self be true.
Which self are you talking about? The greater self or the tiny
ego
self? Exactly.
Well, if it's and I think it's to the ego self rather than wedding yourself to a deeper, more universal set of values that we can all subscribe to. Look, mate, to finish, I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, even though you're only the third person to be on the podcast.
Honored.
Oh, that's great. It's a pleasure having you. So the final question I have for you is why poetry? Very short question. Why poetry in the 21st century?
Richness of experience. Adventure. Higher dimensions of consciousness. That's why.
Fantastic.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good answer. Short but succinct and straight to the point. All right, Phil. Well, thanks so much. Maybe in the future I'll have a chance to talk to Lucy.
Would love to make that happen. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's tough to coordinate times when you're 14 hours ahead.
No, very much so.
But
So it's what is it? It's about 8 o'clock over there at the moment.
It's about 8 a.m. over here. Lucy. We had a birthday celebration yesterday, and she did a wonderful job making all kinds of amazing food, and so she deserves to sleep in. God bless her. So
And it's 10 at night here, so
yes.
Yeah.
So we should wrap things up so you can
well, I've got a young boy. I've got to get into bed soon, but
gotcha.
yeah, no, it's been absolutely marvelous.
Yes,
talking to you.
Likewise.
All right.
James, thank you so much.
No worries. So it's time for us to wrap up this episode of the Lit Poetry Podcast. I hope you've had a great time tuning in. Now, if you need any other resources on poetry, please feel free to visit our website at www.litpoetry.com. We'll finish by listening one more time to the poem Bluebird by Charles Bukowski, this time set to a different piece of music to draw out a different type of mood. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.
Bluebird by Charles Bukowski. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on him and inhale cigarette smoke, and the whores and the bartenders and the grocery clerks never know that he's in there. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay down. Do you want to mess me up? You want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night, sometimes, when everybody's asleep. I say, I know that you're there, so don't be sad. And I put him back, but he's singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die, and we sleep together like that, with our secret pact, and it's nice enough to make a man weep. But I don't weep. Do you?
You've been listening to the Lit Poetry Podcast, presented by James Laidler. For more podcasts, poetry videos, and other useful resources, visit our website at www.litpoetry.com. Thanks for listening.